Now, a win, a clean sheet, a manager speaking sense in the press conference. There's literally nothing to moan about this week. I think we can just crack on and talk about the football for the first time in ages. And what a great result it was as well. Saints picking up all 3 points at Stamford Bridge. Glenn, I'm going to start with you. It seemed very much to me yesterday about a case of getting back to what we used to do well. It was good to see.
Yeah, it was right from the way the team set up on the pitch at the start of the game. It was basically 4-4-2, wasn't it? With everybody pressing relatively high to try and make it uncomfortable for Chelsea, and it was like the good days of Ralph all over again. That first half was really good. We forced them into mistakes. Didn't really give them many opportunities at all. They were really a team that was a collection of individuals. They didn't really play, as a team. Very expensive individuals, as we said last week, but they didn't really have the patterns of play. And it wasn't until half time when they brought Sterling on that they sort of did anything really to worry us. But I thought we played really well. The first half, I was really impressed with Tall Paul up front. The amount of work he did bringing others into play, controlling the long balls forward with his chest and just holding people off. Thought he was excellent, and we were a threat. And obviously getting the goal before half time is just standard, barely worth talking about, isn't it now? It was good to see Stuart Armstrong back in the team. I thought, just to add a little bit of quality that has been lacking with our forward play, and the two new lads. It was great. So it was a really enjoyable first half. Obviously 1-0 up. The only thing that made me slightly nervous was I thought the substitutions possibly came a little bit early. We were obviously playing for 1-0 from the moment we took off our three sort of most forward players. That kind of worried me a bit, but the end justified the means at the end of the day, and we got to the end and won the game. And it's always lovely to win games against the Super League clubs. And Chelsea Twitter was just glorious after the game, as usual.
It still is today as well.
Oh, how can we not win against bottom of the table, no manager Southampton? It's just glorious.
Well, it's not an unreasonable question from their perspective, to be fair.
600 million is obviously not enough to spend on a collection of individuals. But they've all got 10-year contracts, so they can I'm sure they'll get a good performance out of them by the time that's finished. So,
time for them to gel.
No, it's great. It was a good performance. We played well in the first half, got in front, and managed the game well in the second half, despite some strange refereeing from David Cour, who's not one of my favourite referees. He always strikes me as one of the weak ones that you don't really want when you're playing against the big sides. But I guess he could have sent Sekou Mara off if he wanted to. If he was being that way inclined, but I think that was kind of evened up. I think by the challenge by Koulibaly in the first minute. I mean, to stamp on Tall Paul's thigh, how high off the ground you have to be to stamp halfway up the leg of a 6'7" striker. I thought that challenge was diabolical. But no, happy days, won the game, and we've got to get something next week now.
And Steve, we were hoping for a good performance, and we got it yesterday. Some would say it's because you're back in the UK now. A win for Sutton, a win for Southampton. That's what was missing. But what did you make of it all yesterday?
Yeah, it was good. We were, I think, ultimately, what we as fans want just is something that you can kind of identify with. And as you say, that was kind of back to what we were doing in the sort of good periods under Ralph, in that we were pressing at the right times. We weren't going just full pelt and being really sort of rash about it. We were picking our moments to put pressure on them. And I think that kind of uncertainty puts defenders sort of in a sort of more sort of uneasy situation than if they know that they're always going to be getting pressed. If they don't know when the guy's going to be right on their shoulder, actually it's probably harder for them to make a call as to whether they try and play it clever or just get rid. And we saw with that early chance where we end up in on the right wing, and Kepa Arrizabalaga has to make a pretty good save. Actually, I think that save was underrated. I thought there wasn't an awful lot made of it. It's like, oh, Kepa's made a save. It's like, actually, that's a really good save.
Yeah.
Because he's literally only just caught. It's only just caught his elbow, and that's kind of taken it away. And I mean, it's one of those. I guess you maybe think, well, if we score that early, then maybe we've scored too early. In a game like that, where you're expected to give up the bulk of the possession. Although weirdly, in the first half we didn't. We had, I saw we had like 60% possession first half.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I don't know whether that reflects especially well on us or especially badly on Chelsea. Perhaps somewhere in the middle.
But, maybe a bit of both.
But no, I mean, first half especially, we were excellent. Causing problems, created chances, didn't really give them a sniff apart from, I think Azpilicueta's one that he hit into the side netting. But I mean, you'd be fuming if you let that goal in. As I look towards the Everton Leeds winner for a prime example. And yeah, second half we dug in, and I mean let's be very blunt about it. We kind of got away with it a little bit with 2 clearances off the line it was just right man in the right place at the right time. And probably 7 days ago, well, I mean we saw with Bednarek 7 days ago that shot cannons between your heels, off your inner calf, and then dribbles over the line. So I mean, Nathan Jones obviously wouldn't have been watching because he was turning out in the Dorset First Division. But if he'd seen that, he'd have just rolled his eyes and said, "Well, how's your luck, lads?" But no, we weathered the storm, and it kind of, I mean, even though 12 minutes went up for the Azpilicueta injury, I kind of it wasn't as if it was the Alamo or anything like that. There were crosses into the box, sure, but they were all manageable. And that's kind of one of the things that Bednarek does tend to do quite well. If you put the ball into his head, he will just deal with it. And I mean, at the end of the day, they don't have a centre forward, so there wasn't really anybody that you had to kind of designate and say, right, we've got to make sure this guy is the one we keep quiet, because they've just got about 27 number 10s who you can kind of draw them out of a tombola before kickoff and hope that something sticks. I mean, as Glenn said, Sterling came on at half time and was by far their best player. Everything in the first half was a little bit pedestrian. They couldn't get through any gaps. We shut the game down really well. Second half, obviously we tired, and Havertz and Sterling seem to have a relatively decent understanding between each other and worked a few little openings. But other than those 2 that were cleared off the line, and I suppose Gallagher's relatively late one as well, not a huge amount to alarm us really, which kind of bodes well going forwards. I mean, you got to obviously look at the fact that Chelsea have scored only a goal again this season, which is a pretty mad stat in itself. But no, I mean, another clean sheet builds confidence, which is something that certainly can't be said for the Leeds dressing room at the moment when we head there next week. So yeah, all in all, pretty good 7 days, I'd say.
Plenty of positives. Jacob, it seemed to me a return to a system that the players were perhaps comfortable with, or more comfortable with, yesterday. But the difference being, since they last played that system, maybe some better players coming in.
Yeah, but also that probably makes it a little bit more difficult because they're not attuned to the pressing triggers and the nuance. And I think it's quite telling that Elyounoussi and Stuart Armstrong played the number 10 positions, because although Elyounoussi gets maligned, nearly all the time
on this podcast,
yeah, exactly. Whenever he starts, I think what they like about him is that he does understand the role in terms of where he's got to be in and out of possession. Although Azpilicueta did have some joy in the first half down his side. We've only got to think from last week. It was, and even the week before post Brentford, it was an absolute disaster inside Staple Wood. There was issues. Coaches were getting marginalised. Ruben Sellers had basically no say in that final week because Nathan Jones said he wanted to compromise, and in his way of compromising, he would only listen to the 2 coaches that he brought in from Luton, and no one really knew what they were doing. And one player said during the game, against Wolves is that they basically stopped listening to Nathan Jones and they tried to do it their own way in the first half, and I think they actually had a bit of success in the first half doing it their own way.
We were quite good first half, weren't we?
Yeah,
Last
exactly.
week?
Exactly, and I think if the players naturally want to be on the front foot, because they want to keep the ball as far away as their goal as possible, because that's when sometimes they get a bit shaky, and they're used to it. They've had 3 or 4 years of Ralph, and although things would go downhill quite a lot of the time, they do feel that's probably their best way of winning games, because they are quite athletic, they are strong, they can fight as long as they've got a right manager backing them to the hilt. And in Ruben Sellers, they loved him, and I think they closed the game off against Wolves on Monday. They spoke about it. They basically cleared the air. Ruben Sellers told a few home truths in terms of, some of you players aren't going to play again for me. We've got a huge squad. I'm going to now start nailing down my team, my substitutions. And then from there on in, they started working on the B team, on the principles of play. And I think it was telling that Dave Horseman came in because he plays the 4-2-2-2 more better than anyone else, and he sticks to the playbook. So I think those principles are really key, and they look fantastic. I thought the coaching dynamic on the sidelines, Carl Martin, extremely highly rated, but he's not really done much under Nathan Jones, and he was at the forefront, wasn't he, celebrating Ruben Sellers. So I think
you were pretty much sat behind them yesterday, weren't you?
Yeah,
you were sat behind the bench. So how what was that dynamic like during the game? Was there a lot of correspondence going on, a lot of chatting and sharing ideas?
Yeah, so
the pictures we saw, they seem to be having the time of their lives.
Dave also had a little monitor in front of him, so Ruben would turn around and just look and see if there's anything they noticed. But yeah, like you said, Martin, I kept looking at Sellers and he just kept smiling and shaking his head. I think after Ward-Prowse scored, he just looked at Carl Martin and was like, what's going on? Like, this is really, really good. And it just looked like he looked like a manager. Actually, it looked like a manager, didn't it? He didn't look like he was pretending or putting on these, this false show. He looked like everything came natural, and you saw that through the way he dressed. I'm sure we'll come on to him, but I was just really impressed by him because none of them looked out of their depth. They looked like they all wanted it, and they all put in the same direction. And I don't think that could be said under Jones, especially in that final week.
We'll get into Ruben Sellers definitely a bit later on. We'll also want to talk about the clean sheet and the back four and defensively how we set up. But I'm just going to ask the three of you about James Ward-Prowse first of all. And I'm going to start with you, Glenn, because to get that free kick down into the bottom corner was special. Someone said to me, "Oh, it's like a penalty," but actually, I would argue that he's better at the free kicks than he is at penalties. I get more nervous when he's taking a penalty than I do when he's got a free kick on the outside of the box.
Yeah, I mean, what was that particular free kick he scored yesterday? It's a slight variation on what he's done a few times, where he kind of whips it into the top corner. So this one went up and went down, and that seemed to be what did the goalkeeper. I think the goalkeeper knew where, roughly where it was going, but he couldn't get himself over and down quick enough to get anywhere near it, really. So because we've seen Ward-Prowse at times whip it into the top corner, and that was kind of the standard, and that was all he had, really. I'm not belittling it in any way, but that was his standard free kick, was to whip it.
Not a bad thing to have, is it?
No, absolutely, but to whip it into that top corner. And then we had the Wolves one last year, where he just smashed it and it went the other side.
Frustration, wasn't it?
And it's like, this is ridiculous. He had one at Brighton that he kind of placed, and it bounced into the bottom corner, and now he's got this one as well. So it's people are noticing the technique now, and just that everyone was highlighting how much that one dipped and how that basically made it impossible for the goalkeeper to get anywhere near it. So and what he said in his interview afterwards, he said it's nice to know that if you practice something enough, you can really become sort of like the master of it, and that's what it is. I mean, he will break Beckham's record, hopefully next week.
Hopefully in a Saints.
Yeah. Hopefully a couple will go in next week, and we can get some points against Leeds. But
the first thing I thought about when it went in yesterday, Glenn, was your observation last week about when he decided not to shoot against Wolves, and that to me, I was just like, the more I think about that, and I probably need to let it go. Like, what on earth was all that about? Because he could have broken the record yesterday.
It was very strange to get 2 free kicks against Wolves, especially the one in the last minute, and basically not shoot. And they were sort of 20, 21 yards out. It was very strange, but I guess we'll never know until he writes a book after he's retired.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, we've been pretty critical of him up until the World Cup break, but post break, with everything else that's been going on, he's been that consistency and our standout player that we need.
Yeah, definitely. I think to be honest, that rejection from the World Cup squad, and deserved as it was, I think that rejection has spurred him on, and he's come back from that, from the mid-season break, more motivated to raise his game and put in the sort of consistent performances we were seeing in previous years. He'd let it slip for 2 or 3 months, and unfortunately, when you play in a position where you're kind of never likely to be a regular starter in that England team, I think with the system that they play, you've kind of got to be on form more often than not. And having that long period of time, just right before the World Cup, where obviously recency bias is going to be key, and if you're clearly not in form, then you're much less likely to be picked, especially if you're on the fringes of things anyway. So I think actually that has helped him, and it's helped us, because I think if he goes to the World Cup, having put in the performances he did, sort of September to the start of November, then I wonder if there might then sort of be an underlying complacency of like, well, I still got in the World Cup squad even with those performances. But no, fair play. He's done what we needed him to do, and that was to kind of lift himself out of that little funk. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, he is going to be one of, if not one of the key players, if not the sole key player, in terms of whether we stay up this year.
It was a real leader's performance for me yesterday, Jacob, and he's had a lot on his shoulders recently. And I guess with the managerial changes, the dressing room are going to be looking to the captain more than ever.
Yeah, they always seem to look at him, don't they? I think everyone's running out of words to describe James Ward-Prowse. Even the managers, like Nathan Jones was highly complimentary of him. Ruben Selles, probably more so. Even more effusive yesterday. He called him the best free kick taker the Premier League's ever seen. I think everyone probably agree with that now, and he'll probably be vindicated in the next couple of weeks when he breaks David Beckham's record. He's done everything for this club, and I didn't really like the criticism he got in the early part of the season, because I know he wasn't at his best, but there were so many issues in that team, and James Ward-Prowse was trying to hold it together, and he's only human. But I think when Southampton need him in these crunch games, he's there. And without James Ward-Prowse, I'd hate to think where Southampton would have been in the last 2 to 3 years. They might just be in middling championship team right now, because he's saved so many points. He's always there. His celebration, I thought, was outstanding. The way he ran over to the away fans after when he scored, and yeah, was
there a little nod to the bench as well as he went past? There was.
I don't know, maybe, but it's been a difficult week for him. I'm sure he's always been the bridge between the management staff and the dressing room, especially with no Ori Romeu there anymore. So he's the guy who puts things forward. And what's interesting is that this week as well, Ruben Selles he's created this leadership group that Southampton didn't have. So I think he's got 3 or 4 leaders. I'm not sure who they are yet. I'm sure he'll elaborate on that as the week goes on. But as long as Ward-Prowse has the burden's taken off his shoulders a little bit, then it can't be a bad thing.
Let's talk about the defensive performance yesterday. Perfect time to get our second clean sheet of the season. I was worried when I saw that Salisu was injured, Glen, but actually some standout performances yesterday, and not just those blocks.
Yeah, I was impressed with Maitland-Niles. I mean, that's his best position without a doubt. He seems to be, you ask him to play right back in a back 4, that seems to simplify things for him. And I thought he had a really good game. He's not perfect. He dozes off occasionally. He let Chilwell get behind him a couple of times, but I thought he had a good game. Bella-Kotchap coming back was huge, because he adds the pace and it was especially needed without Salisu being there. I think we can safely assume that Salisu and Bella-Kotchap would have been the 2 centre backs if Salisu had been fit. But Bednarek had a decent game. I liked in the first half in particular, he was very, very aggressive with his closing down of Fofana, who was their sort of main forward player. And I thought he did a good job there. As Steve said, he did the basics well in the second half, just heading balls away and stuff like that. Bednarek is for me, he's passable in a back four for the simple reason that he has to take responsibility. There's nowhere to hide. When there's just two centre halves, you can't be looking at someone 3 yards to your right or 3 yards to your left to do the job for you. You've got to do it. Otherwise, it's going to be your fault. And he always seems to have his better games in a back four. Will he play next week? I don't think he will if Salisu is fit. But he did a good job, and Perot obviously had the standout moment with clearing that ball off the line,
celebrating like he'd won the World Cup.
Yeah, okay, yeah, a bit over the top, but why not?
Love it.
But the other thing is, it's obviously not just the back four. It's I thought Romeo Lavia was great in midfield again. Bearing in mind you've got £105 million player he's playing against there. And that Mateo Kovacic, who I always thought is a good player. And there was one bit where Lavia just kind of bodied him out of the way. And it's just like, this is ridiculous for a 19-year-old kid to do that. And again, he was, he's wasting time as he got substituted and generally
good to see, isn't it?
Yeah, all the dark arts, housery, great stuff. And I thought he had another superb game. So as a defensive unit, as you said, Elianusi and Armstrong, they did their tracking back well, and just made it difficult. And Chelsea just didn't. If I was talking about Chelsea, I'd be absolutely raging at the lack of sort of team pattern. Similar to what we've had, to be honest, this season under Jones and even under Ralph. There didn't seem to be any sort of pattern of play as to how to progress to the final third of the field and get shots on target. And as Steve said in the second half, you can put as many crosses in the box as you like if you haven't got anyone in there to head them. And so happy day. So a good defensive performance, decent for Bazunu to get a clean sheet as well, can only help him. And he looks solid. Sometimes even if he doesn't let in goals, he looks a bit shaky. But I thought he was decent yesterday.
So is that going to be the key to staying up now, Steve? Playing a left-footed left back at left back and a right-footed right back at right back and a back four. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but
it's a novel concept, isn't it?
Yeah, seemed to work yesterday.
Yes. It's again though. It's one of those you've got. It's horses for courses, and the way that Chelsea play does hugely lend itself to playing a flat back four. Because you can just be able to see exactly what's in front of you. They don't have the people that are running the channels in that system, so you don't have any real advantage from playing an extra centre back. You basically, if you do that against Chelsea, you sacrifice the midfield completely. Whereas we had a fair degree of control of the midfield, I thought, for most of the game, really. Fernandes and Kovacic were decent in patches, but we kind of always had four there really in the centre because of the narrow system. Not only did you have Lavia and Ward-Prowse, but you had Elianusi and Armstrong tucking in for the most part as well. So we just crowded them out. And going forward, that system might not work against certain other teams.
Yeah, I think in home games we'll need a little bit more than what that system, where we're expected to have the ball and do a little bit more with it. I think we need a bit more than what that system and those players offer. Yeah,
definitely. And also, let's also remember that since middle of November, we've still only scored one Premier League goal from open play. Another set piece goal. So while we've created a little bit more yesterday against a good side, I think we still need to have something that's good, that's going to just generate a few more chances, because we know that at the moment our conversion rate is low. So if your conversion rate is low, you've got to create more to give yourself that opportunity. And Leeds' defence should present us with that opportunity, but it's up to us to come up with a system that's going to take advantage of that.
Well, just before we get on to that Leeds game, Jacob, there's a few questions tonight about coming in on the chat about players that weren't in the squad yesterday. I know you touched on Ruben Sellers setting out his stall pretty early on in the week. The names that are going to come up time and time again, I guess, are Orsic and Saleta Cour, who weren't in the match day squad yesterday. Does that tell us more about them than we thought? Because I know last week we were talking about it might have been that they'd fallen out with Nathan Jones, and it was going to be quite telling if they were straight into the starting 11 yesterday, and clearly they weren't. So perhaps the problems, whatever they may be, are shared by different coaches.
Yeah, maybe. I think Saleta is quite an honest and direct speaker. He's obviously got that experience playing at the international level. There might have been an issue a week or a couple of weeks ago. But the important thing is that Ruben Sellers or even Nathan Jones, to some extent, sees these players every day. He sees how aggressive they are. I know that's how.
There's a word we weren't expecting to use for a while.
Who's called it, but this is what Sellers exactly. I know, but Saleta I think has been good, but I think he's probably better in a low block or a mid to low block. I think if you look at the data, which Sellers I'm sure does, he's not the most aggressive. There are issues or there are concerns over his 1v1 defending, and if Southampton are going to go high, I put a picture on Twitter yesterday about how high Bella-Kotchap was in the half. He was the deepest Southampton player, but he was still well inside Chelsea's half, and Saleta probably hasn't got the pace or the 1v1 ability to do that. I'm surprised he wasn't on the bench, but then Lianco probably gives you that option to play it right back. He can play on the outside centre back if he wants to go to a back three, so he gives a little bit more. Orsic, he's a little bit off the pace, and what Sellers said yesterday is that he wants his team to transition fast. So whenever they won the ball from deep, they transition fast. And Orsic is in the quickest. He's a little bit like Jadon Sancho in a way, in terms of if he's a winger, he wants to combine out wide with players around him. But in order to do that, I think I touched on this a few weeks ago. In order to do that, Southampton need to have sustained possession, need to have 50, 55, 60% in Chelsea's half or the opposition's half. And right now, Southampton have got that. So, and I have concerns of whether he's a number 10 as well, if you want to play that system. So, yeah, there might be issues off the pitch, but Sellers went for players that he trusts and for players that know their jobs. And I think there's too many concerns from both of them at the moment to put him back in.
And if we're winning games, of course, it's all largely irrelevant anyway.